Okay, Noor, you should know that here, come on around this way. You should know that our sound engineer, Grace, in the back, her primary concern is that you would fall. So I said I would be sure to warn you.
Testing? Testing?
But these are where's you want with me?
Just 1 second, make a test, just make sure the mic is okay.
Hey, Ari.
Test, yeah.
And so these are singular direction mics. So when you hold them, just hold them like that.
Okay.
I'll go over here. We need some more furnishings in here. Shalom and salam, shalom and salam. We welcome all of you tonight. Grace and peace to you all. Welcome to Trinity Avenue Presbyterian Church. Thank you so much for the tithe of your time, the tithe of your love for this community, the tithe of your commitment to coming together. We welcome those of you who are joining us through the live stream and through the recording later on. We are so pleased that you're here. My name is Katie Crow. I'm the senior pastor of this congregation and have the privilege of serving with our associate pastor for public witness, Emily Wilkes, who's in the back there. If you came in through that sanctuary entrance there, you passed through an entryway that was renovated by and dedicated in honor to Bethel Synagogue. Bethel lived with us for 16 months a couple of years ago, and they gave a love offering to renovate that space to help us extend hospitality. And so we're really grateful for the way that there is a very visual reminder of the importance and the power of interfaith relationships. It was in the vein of the interfaith love and the community and the connections that we share as families of Abraham that we traveled 2 summers ago to Israel, where we had the pleasure of meeting Noor and Hanan with roots and seeing their brave reconciliation and peacemaking work on the West Bank of Israel. And so we were humbled, we were overwhelmed, and we are overjoyed that they are here. We are also heartbroken for the context in which we gather, but also so very grateful to have peacemakers abroad coming to talk to us about how we can be praying with greater specificity and how we can be agents of peacemaking here at home. I'm very grateful to welcome Rabbi Daniel Graber as well, and he'll get to talk from the pulpit, and share a bit more about our delight and hope for the gathering.
Can you hear me? Okay. Shalom and salam. Welcome. Thank you, Katie. It feels really nice to be back. I'll do a little closer. Is that better? Okay. Oh, look, it's the Psalms. How wonderful. So, first of all, I want to say a thank you to Jewish for Good, the umbrella organization for Jewish communities here in Durham, who sponsored the evening tonight, to Jill Madsen for her vision and partnership in bringing such important events together. I have said many times that we will not affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by what we say here in Durham, North Carolina, but we can deeply affect our communities, our community, by the way in which we discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict among us. The past 4 months have been deeply painful, with many and the most important casualties, those in Gaza and those in Israel. But there have been casualties to our community as well, to the internal Jewish community and to the Durham Jewish community in how we interact and speak with each other. I think it is ironic and that Hanan and Noor, who, by the way, in 2022, when our group went, I had COVID, and so I was not able to go and hear the presentation, so I'm looking forward to learning along with you tonight. My deepest hope for this evening is that in witnessing how these two peacemakers speak with each other when they and their families and their communities are directly affected by what unfolds in the Middle East, that we in our community can learn and learn again how to speak with each other with a deep sense that the image of God resides within each of us. Katie.
Some gatherings in the community have changed course in their agenda on account of a spirit of demonstration that has been interjected. In the event of the interjection of demonstration, you will hear me sing Hine Matov, and those of you who know it are welcome to join in, and we will transition demonstration voices out of the space so that we can be sure to center our hearts and have an open mind and open ears to this space. There's also plenty of time for question and answer following this time. And so rather than pass the mic and scurry around, you have some goldenrod sheets of paper, and invite you during the course of the presentation as a question surfaces for you, or following the presentation as space is created for you to write down your question, write down what you'd like to ask, and hold those goldenrod pages up in the air. And our ushers will come forward, they will collect those and sift through them, and we will ask as many of those questions that we can and give Noor and Hanan a chance to respond. So without further ado, please join us in welcoming our dear friends from Roots. Welcome.
I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to hear us speak. And of course, I want to thank our gracious hosts and all those who are sponsoring and co-sponsoring this evening. We are all getting on a plane together. We're on a trip to the Middle East. It's a long flight, over 12 hours. When we finally get there, we go through customs at Ben Gurion Airport. We get on a bus. We're traveling towards Jerusalem. That means we're going east. But the bus veers a little bit to the south. We find ourselves ascending. We pass a checkpoint. We see Israeli soldiers. The scenery begins to change. We see Palestinian villages. On one side, Sawif. On the other side, Jabba. The bus continues in even a steeper ascent. We come to the Gush Etzion junction. We see Jewish settlements on the side. We see Alon Shvut, where I live. We see Kfar Etzion, a kibbutz. And then we turn off onto a dirt road. And after less than a 5-minute drive on that dirt road, we embark and we enter through the gate of what looks like a Palestinian farmstead. It's surrounded by a stone fence, pretty high, metal gate that's open. We walk in inside and we see classrooms, bathrooms, kitchen. We see some animals, lots of trees. We sit down in the classroom, and now I want to give you context to that classroom that we're all now sitting in. Here's the context. We're in the West Bank right now. Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs live there very, very close to each other, but in totally different worlds. You see, and this perhaps you knew, the Israelis speak Hebrew, the Palestinians speak Arabic. They also have different cultures, of course, different religions. Did you know that they have different health systems? That means the doctor and the dentist and the hospital there in the West Bank, you will never meet someone from the other side. It's completely segregated. It's not just the health system, it's also the educational system. Whether we're talking about preschool or elementary school, middle school, high school, up to university, there in the West Bank, it's completely separate. The transportation systems are completely separate. If you're in a taxi, it's never with someone from the other side. Same thing with the buses. No. Now, it is true that we drive the two sides on the same roads sometimes. But even when we drive on the same roads, we have different color license plates, the Israelis and the Palestinians, so you know who the other is. We also have different calendars, the Israelis and the Palestinians. When people go to work, when they have vacation, when the schools are off, it's completely different and completely separate. We also live, by the way, under different legal systems. I live there as a Jewish Israeli in the West Bank, and I'm a citizen of the State of Israel. I have full voting rights, civil rights, completely human rights. The Palestinians who live literally 5 minutes away down the road are citizens of no country with no civil or political rights. And there we are living in the same landmass. And there's even more bad news. There's absolutely no common ground. And I don't mean that as a metaphor, I mean literally common ground. Because the law that governs the West Bank is Israeli military law, and according to Israeli military law, Israelis are not permitted to enter Palestinian towns, city, villages, residential areas, no. And Palestinians, by the same law, are not permitted to enter Israeli built-up areas, towns, cities, except if they are menial workers under armed guard with a work permit during work hours. But otherwise, even if there was a strange Israeli and a strange Palestinian that wanted to have a cup of coffee together, there's no place to do it. So what happens when these two enemies, these two different cultures, live in the exact same landmass so far away? Well, you know the answer to my question. It's ignorance of the other, and it's bigotry and stereotypes. It's perhaps what Americans call racism, and it's lots of fear and resentment and hate. That's really bad. I said there's no place for the two sides to have a cup of coffee if they wanted to. There's one exception to that. And the one exception is the place that you're sitting right now. Remember where you are. You are actually in the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank. The only joint space. It's called Merkaz Karama. Merkaz is a Hebrew word that means center. Karama is the Arabic word for dignity. The Dignity Center is the only Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank. It's the only shared space. And what do we do there? It's a community center. It's a Palestinian farmstead that we built a few buildings, and we have bathrooms, etc. We have there a little bit of sports activities for the two sides, educational activities. We have religious activities, cultural activities, political discussions. Let me give you some examples. The Women's Photography Workshop, the Women's Storytelling Group, the Women's Playback Group, the 3 different interfaith dialogue groups, the summer camp, the day camp, activities for little kids, political discussions once a month, a trauma workshop, music, just like a normal community center, except that the two peoples that come there have, in 99% of the cases, never, ever met someone from the other side. And you can literally sometimes see someone has come with his friend the first time. He sits with his friend on this side, and the other side is on the other side of the room. This new person might elbow his friend. Why did you bring me here? Look at them, they're going to kill me. And they're really afraid. We begin to break the ice, the activities begin. It doesn't take more than an hour or two, or perhaps a second session and a third. It doesn't take that long to begin to discover that what you thought about the other side, that they're animals, that they're monsters, that they're demons, is actually not true at all. And they turn out to be human beings. Wow. And there are some people, perhaps even most, that are surprised that the other is a human being. And then we're embarrassed that we're surprised, but we're still surprised. But what I want to emphasize is that the humanization, although it's really, really important, is not the most important thing we do, and certainly not the most difficult thing we do. Because we, and I'll say in a few seconds who is we in the Dignity Center make a great effort to go beyond humanization. It's not just about meeting the other as a human being, it's about meeting the other in the fullness of their ethnic, historical, religious, and political identity. Those things which separate us, our identities, we do not ignore, we do not sweep under the rug, we put it front and center. And it turns out let's say I'm an Israeli like I am, that Palestinian girl on the other side of the room thinks about me something completely different than when I think about myself. And when I think about her, something completely different than what she knows about herself. To come face to face with the fact that these two identities contradict each other, that's really, really difficult. And even more difficult is to begin to see a little bit of legitimacy in the other's self-understanding and the other's understanding of me. It's really, really, really hard. It's hard because I believe that most Israelis and most Palestinians, and perhaps I should say since October 7th, just about all Israelis and all Palestinians are sick in the heart. And this disease of the heart, I have a name for it. The virus coursing through our veins, I call it the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity infects us with the conviction that I am real and you are fake, that I belong in this land and you do not belong. My identity is true and yours is not legitimate, it's made up. And what happens at the activities of the Dignity Center, not immediately and not always and certainly not completely, is a little bit of healing. Healing from the hubris of exclusivity. To come to a place in which I begin to recognize that with all the glorious historical truth of my identity, your identity also has some legitimacy and also has some connection to the land. So the Dignity Center was created by Roots, in Hebrew Shorashim, in Arabic Judur, about 10 years ago, where the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding, nonviolence, and transformation. About 9 years ago, when we were founded, Israeli television made a movie about the first year and a half of Roots, and we want to show you now a 2-minute trailer from that movie. It was called The Field, and you'll see a little bit of the Dignity Center, as it was 9 years ago, and you'll see the Palestinian founder of Roots, Ali Abu Awad. The Dignity Center is created and stands on his family's land.
נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי. כשבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות, אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין, השמאל לא יעשה שלום.
The first time I had heard someone talk about being in Israeli jail, someone talking about suffering under occupation.
וזה שאני מכבד אותך, זה הכבוד שאני מכבד את עצמי כשאני מסתכל על עצמי בראי.
We believe that religion has to be part of the solution.
אללהו אכבר. אדוני הוא האלוהים.
יהודים ניצודים בארץ ישראל כמו חיות, ממש. פשוט צדים אותם. צדים אותם. רואים רכב, איפה הם? איפה השותף? איפה האח?
אתה יושב על הכלכלה שלי, אתה יושב על הבית שלי, אתה יושב על הלב שלי, אבל לא כשותף.
האם אתה מוכן להודות שהישיבה שלך פה היא ישיבה של פשע? וממילא תגיד לי מבחינה פוליטית.
The Jewish people, that we own this land? We don't own this land. We belong to this land. And the Palestinian people also belong to this land.
אנחנו האחרונים בעולם שצריך לשבת אחד עם השני. באתי לבקש לדרוש איתם מחדלים. מפני שאת ואני סבלנו שלא חיפשנו את זה לפני.
My name is Hanan Schlesinger, as you've heard. I've been a rabbi for many years, 40 years, and I'm going to introduce myself with 3 labels. The first label is Jew, the second is Zionist, the third is settler. I'm going to take a few minutes to unpack those 3 labels. When I say I'm a Jew, I am not talking about religion. Now, I'm a religious Jew, but the substratum there, Jew, is about peoplehood, about the sense of collective identity, of common destiny, that the Jewish people have been on this earth for 3,000 years, always with a sense of responsibility one for the other. And as we've gone through the annals of history, we've known, and we've known this from the very beginning, that the Jewish people, as a nation, are connected to a particular piece of real estate in the Middle East, what the Bible calls the land of Canaan, Eretz Canaan. And later it was called, and is called, the land of Israel. And because of the deep, abiding historical connection between the Jewish people and the Jewish land, I can, from my perspective, move seamlessly from talking about myself as a Jew to talking about myself as a Zionist. For me, it's one continuous development. Zionism is, for me, nothing more than a fulfillment of the fullness of Jewish historical identity. Now, Zionism, of course, is a political movement created about 150 years ago, the national liberation of the movement of the Jewish people, to return us home. What do I mean, return us home? I mean that 2,000 years ago, only a few decades after the death of Jesus, the second Jewish Commonwealth was destroyed by the Roman Empire. Our common people were decimated, our priests, our judges, our king, and we were sent into exile. We found ourselves scattered in the Middle East, Northern Africa. Later we made it to Europe, and then much later to Australia and to America. And throughout these 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people have had a sense that we're not where we're supposed to be. We're in limbo. We're waiting to come home. We're yearning. We're hoping. We're praying. L'shana haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Over 3 million Jews were returned home to the land of Israel through the Zionist movement, and one of those 3 million is standing here right now. I was born in New York. Perhaps you can hear by my accent. I wasn't born in Israel. When I was 18, I got on the plane and I made Aliyah, which means I ascended to the land. I came home. I closed the circle. I fulfilled the dreams of my great-great-great-great-grandmother and great-great-great-great-grandfather, and of all those generations of Jews who couldn't do what I merited to do. I came home. And then I said that I'm a settler. Do we have on the screen there the map? We do. So what does it mean I'm a settler? It means that I'm an Israeli, a Jewish Israeli citizen, and that I've moved over the green line. The green line is that dotted line separating Israel proper in something like blue or gray from the light orange. I'm sorry, the opposite, right? Right. Israel is the light orange, and the West Bank is in that blue or gray there. And the line separating them, the dotted line, is the green line. I moved over the green line to the West Bank, so that makes me a settler. Now, I know that living where I live and calling myself a settler sounds to many people like a dangerous, extremist political statement, and I'm aware of that. But I want to make the point that I live where I live not because of politics, but rather because of history. I live where I live because it's in the West Bank that 85% of the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, was written. The book of Genesis from chapter 12, and the book of Joshua, and then the book of Judges and Kings. It's all about life in the West Bank. That's where the Jewish people were born. And during most of the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived in the land of Canaan, we almost never made it to the coastal cities, to Haifa, to Tel Aviv, to Ashdod. That's where the Philistines lived. Those coastal cities, they're part of the land of Israel, they're part of the state of Israel, but we Jews do not have our history there. Where I live in the West Bank, you can scratch the ground with your heel and come up in so many places with potsherds that our ancestors left 2,000 years ago. And it's as if those potsherds speak to me. They talk about historical continuity, the chain of tradition, and they strengthen that feeling of coming home. You know, where I come from in the West Bank, you can study the Bible, not just in the classroom, put it in your backpack, you walk into the fields, you open up the pages, and you're literally walking the footsteps of all those patriarchs and matriarchs and leaders and rabbis and priests and prophetesses. It's very, very, very powerful. And for the same reason that I live there, for that same reason, I usually don't call it the West Bank. I call it Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria. And I know that for many people, when I say Judea and Samaria, it sounds like, again, I'm making a dangerous, extremist political statement. But I call it Judea and Samaria not for politics, but again for history. I call it that because that's what the Jewish people have called it for the past 2,500 years. Samaria was the kingdom of the 10 tribes north of Jerusalem, and south of Jerusalem was the kingdom of Judea. That's where I live today, in Judea. So I call it what I call it for the same reason I live there, because of the sense of historical continuity, the chain of tradition, the homecoming, the closing the circle, coming back to where I began and where I belong. And then about 10 years and 2 months ago, I began to learn that in a certain sense, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And I don't mean that everything I just said was a lie, not at all. But I do mean that everything I just said was a half-truth. And I'll explain. For 33 years, I'd lived in Judea and Samaria and just about never met a Palestinian. I was blind to the existence of the Palestinian people. For me, the Palestinians, if they existed at all, were like the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, my movie, but they're not part of the plot. You can ignore them. I lived as if my Jewish story is the only story in that land. And through meeting Palestinians, I learned that as true and glorious as my story is, there's another story in the land that's no less true and no less glorious. And today I believe that if you mistake part of the truth for the whole truth, then you're very close to falsehood, and that's not a place that I want to be any longer. Ten years and 3 months ago, I'm driving my car in Judea. I have in the car 2 evangelical pastors, friends of mine. One's from New Jersey, one's from Dallas, Texas. And they, of course, believe in the same Bible that the Jews believe in, the Jewish Hebrew Old Testament, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, who all of them prophesize that yes, the Jewish people will be exiled from the land because of their sins, but someday, after long, hard exile, the Jews, the children of Israel, will come back again. And the 2 pastors, Bob and Kevin, just like me, believe that that biblical prophecy is coming true today, that we Jews are coming home, rebuilding the land. They asked me to show them around so they can see how these prophecies are coming true. So we drove, I showed them the roads we paved and the forests we planted and the myriad of buildings that we've constructed. With great pride, I showed them around. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker who was on the side of the road. Then I picked up another hitchhiker. After a while, the 2 hitchhikers asked to get out of the car, and I stopped. When we started to drive again, one of the pastors, it was Bob Roberts, sitting in the front seat next to me. Bob said, Hanan, wow, you just taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. You picked up hitchhikers. That was great. No one does that in Texas. So I said to Bob, you know, Bob, it's not just me. We all pick up hitchhikers around here because we have a common mission. We trust each other. And just like everyone else, I said, I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to Bob and Kevin, and even worse, I was lying to myself. I said, and I deeply believed, that I pick up every person. But it wasn't true, because I picked up only Jews. And it dawned on me at that moment that there was some moral blemish inside me. I picked up only Jews, but I said I pick up every person. What that means is either I don't see the Palestinians, or 85% of the population, or I don't see them as significant human beings. And I said to Bob and Kevin, with a great sense of embarrassment, something wrong with me and I have to do something about it. And talking together, we decided that what I have to do is meet my neighbors and thereby turn the Palestinians into human beings in my heart and my consciousness. I began my journey. It wasn't easy at the beginning or the middle. I got invited to meet some Palestinians. It's now the last Wednesday of January 2014. I get up from the chair I'm sitting in my living room, I go to walk out the front door to meet Palestinians, and as I open the door, my wife calls behind me, "Where are you going?" I told her I'm going to meet Palestinians. And that's when all hell broke loose. She started to scream, "What do you mean, meet Palestinians? They'll kill you." So I came back inside, and I saw the terror in my wife's eyes as I approached her. She begged me not to go. But I knew that I had to do this. I walked out the front door, closed the door behind me, and as I closed the door, I remember saying to myself, perhaps she is right, perhaps they will kill me. My heart's pounding. I begin to walk, following a map that I had. I didn't have to take the car. It was about a 22-minute walk. And I find myself coming in the same gate that you guys came in half an hour ago after you got off of the bus and you entered into the land that's the Dignity Center. In those days, 10 years and 2 months ago, there was no Dignity Center, just a piece of Palestinian farmland, pretty barren, not too many trees, nothing there. As I walked in, I saw something I've never seen before, something you might call a miracle. I saw 15 Israelis, some of them my neighbors, and 15 Palestinians doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other. Never seen that before. So I walk in, I see groups of 2 here, 3 here, and then I saw a Palestinian woman dressed in head to toe, brown, only her face was uncovered, clearly observant Muslim. She's standing alone. So I walked up to her and I said hello in English. She said hello back to me. After a very short conversation of a minute, I think, I said to her, "I can't believe that I'm talking to you." And she said to me, "I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers." Now, I had no idea why she said that, but in any case, she was willing to keep talking, so it seemed okay. We kept going in the conversation, but not for long. Her son walked over and she introduced me. She told me his name is Yazin, and he's 17 years old. So Yazin and I shook hands, and as we began to talk, I saw he's wearing a windbreaker, and on the jacket are 3 words in the English language. And the 3 words were, "Seeds of Peace." Seeds of Peace. Anyone here know what Seeds of Peace is? A show of hands? Oh, that's pretty good. That's perhaps 6% of you. So the 6% who know what Seeds of Peace is don't say anything. The rest of us who don't know what Seeds of Peace is are just like I was then, no idea what Seeds of Peace is. I looked at Yazin, he's a Palestinian. I looked at the jacket, it says peace. And I said to myself, peace, Palestinian, that can't go together. Why is he wearing this jacket? They don't even with peace. They're dangerous, violent people. So half jokingly, I said to Yazin, "What's this Seeds of Peace thing?" I'm half expecting that he's going to say, "I don't know, someone gave me the jacket." Otherwise, why would he wear a jacket that says peace in it? But that's not what he told me. He said that Seeds of Peace is a summer camp in Maine, USA. And it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for summer of recreation and reconciliation. And he told me that he spent the past summer in the camp, the whole summer. He had a very good time there. He met Israeli kids, they're now friends on Facebook, he said. And he told me that he was so changed by meeting Israeli young people his age that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our 2 peoples. And I remember looking at Yazin and listening to him and not knowing if I can believe what he's saying, because it contradicted everything that I knew to be true. And you could say that Yazin's mother and Yazin himself were the first 2 Palestinians that began the process of unsettling me. And then his father walks over, the woman's husband. Jamal is a stocky guy. He's just a little bit taller than me, very well built. We shake hands, and he says, "Where are you from, Hanan?" I said, "I'm from Alon Shvut." That's the name of the settlement I live in. And I said, "Jamal, where are you from?" He said, "Beit Umar." When he said those 2 words, Beit Umar, I had half of a heart attack. Because I know Beit Umar. It's a Palestinian city, about a 7-8-minute drive south of where I live. I've been on the road past Beit Umar hundreds, perhaps thousands of times, and I've been stoned there with my wife and kids in the car. And once a friend of mine was murdered there, a doctor coming home late at night from Hadassah Hospital, murdered, shot at by presumably people in Beit Umar. So I know those people, they're dangerous. Now it turns out I'm talking to this family from Beit Umar. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world for me. Jamal starts telling me how he and his family came to this gathering of Palestinians and Israelis. He said, "Hanan, you know there's no Jews in Beit Umar." "Yeah, I know. But there are, he says, the Jewish soldiers who guard the entrance to the city. And they make life for us Palestinians very difficult. They prevent freedom of movement going in and out. So we hate the soldiers. And by extension, since they're the only Jews we know, we hate all Jews. No one in Beit Umar would want to meet a Jew over a cup of coffee. But he said, many, many years ago, he had a Palestinian friend from the city of Jericho. And this friend said, Jamal, you know, I'm part of a dialogue group of Israelis and Palestinians. We meet once a month. Why don't you come along? And Jamal said to me, I told my friend, I'm never, ever coming with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. A proud Palestinian does not go to meet the Israeli enemy. But this friend of Jamal's wouldn't take no for an answer. And month after month, he's trying to convince him. Eventually, Jamal tagged along. He sat in a circle in Jericho, 15 and 15. And Jamal said he didn't participate. He sat in the corner. But he did listen a little bit. And at one point, Jamal said, one of the Israeli men got up from his chair, and that made Jamal a little bit uncomfortable. And then this Jewish Israeli man looked at Jamal, started to walk towards him. He was really afraid what would happen. And then Jamal said, this Jewish guy came right up to me and forced me to shake his hand. He asked me questions. We had a conversation. It was very, very unpleasant. When the guy finally walked away, Jamal said, I wiped the sweat off my brow and I ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off my hand from touching a Jew, and I vowed never to come back to this cursed place. Jamal was really shaken. He went home, told his wife, and she agreed he made a big mistake by going there, and what has to happen now is never go back and never tell anyone in Beit Umar that he was there. But Jamal's friend had other plans. And I really don't know how it happened, but the next month, Jamal and his wife found themselves in that circle of people in Jericho. And then the month after, and the month after, and all the months after, Jamal looks at me at the end of this story, and he says, Hanan, where I thought there was only an enemy, I discovered a human being who turned out to be a partner, and that changed me. And I don't know if I can believe what Jamal is saying. Just like the things I heard his son say, this contradicts everything that I know to be true, and I'm getting very, very confused and very, very unsettled and very, very challenged. Jamal tells me another story. You know, Hanan, there's little kids, many of them in Beit Umar, 5, 7 years old, and when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, why do they start to cry? And he thought that I was trying to joke, that I didn't understand why they start to cry. So if everyone understands, you look at me, you start to cry. He got flustered that I said I don't understand. He said, Hanan, it's the kippah you have in your head, and it's the beard, and those things hanging from your pants, because so many people, he said, who dress like you, they walk into Beit Umar with their submachine guns and they kill the kids. I thought that was borderline anti-Semitism. What I have to do is tell him off. We don't do things like that. You're crazy. Where did you get this from? But before I flew into a rage, a light bulb went off in my mind, and I realized that this is a moment of blessing. Because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And that can be a blessing, Hanan, if you're able to hold that experience and absorb it and process it. So I didn't say anything to Jamal. I'm looking at him. I'm thinking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And then I have a vision in my mind's eye of my 2 grown sons and my son-in-law taking a walk in the fields around our house with their wives and with my grandchildren, their children. And I see in my vision that the 3 young fathers are carrying pistols like all the other Jewish men. And suddenly I say to myself, those guns must be frightening to little Palestinian kids. So I said to Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. Then he said to me, no, you can't be afraid of us because we're afraid of you. I had no idea what was going on. They're afraid of us? Why are they afraid of us? Those guns are only for self-defense. We don't use them. We're peace-loving people. And I'm getting really, really uptight and confused. Later, we, 15 Israelis, 15 Palestinians at this gathering, we sat in a circle. And Ali Abu Awad, who you saw in the film, the owner of the land we were convening on and the Palestinian convener of this get-together, Ali got up to speak in perfect Hebrew that it turns out he learned from many years in Israeli jail. And Ali said, my name is Ali Abu Awad. I'm from a proud Palestinian family. For generations, we lived in Kubeba, and I said to myself, what's Kubeba? In 1948, during the war, he said, we were forced out. We had to all leave the village. We came to the West Bank, to Beit Umar. We've been living here since 1948 under Jordanian occupation. 1967, the Israelis came, conquered the Jordanians, and now we're living under the rigors and the difficulties of the Israeli occupation. And Ali went on with his story, but I wasn't with him anymore. He said Israeli occupation, that means my occupation. What is he talking about? Where's an Israeli occupation around here? Never in my life had he been in the same room with someone who used those two words, Israeli occupation. I didn't know what he's talking about. Now, it's true, I'd read on the news and I'd heard on the radio that the United Nations and the European Union always condemning the Israeli occupation. But I had no idea where such a thing could be. Because when I drive on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? But Ali's talking about occupation, about violent occupation. He said that during the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, his mother was a leader, giving out flyers and organizing strikes. The Israeli army targeted her, he said. They came in and beat her up in front of Ali's eyes. He was a young man. And then they came a second time. They took her to jail for 6 years. Then Ali said he was sentenced to 10 years in Israeli jail and was not told the charge in the secret file against him. And I want to get up and say, Ali, you're a liar. That can't be true. We don't do things like that. But I didn't get up to say he's a liar because he wasn't trying to convince us of anything. He was just telling the story of his life. And I went home that day undone, unsettled, confused, challenged, angry that the Palestinians can say what they're saying, but also angry at myself for never hearing this before. And I'm getting more and more nauseous. I'm walking back and forth in my study, and I feel my stomach is churning. I have to bend down and put it back in because I'm so confused and so upset. I went back, perhaps a week later, to the same place I first met Ali and Jamal and the others. They were there. We started to talk. I wasn't the only Israeli. And after a few weeks, Jamal and Ali weren't the only Palestinians. We talked to the wee hours of the night. For weeks that became months, that became years. First it was just 5 and 5, and then 10 and 10, and 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. More and more people began to gather around. And what we did is to tell stories and listen to stories. The Palestinians told us the stories of who they are, their history, their identity, their aspirations for the future. And we Israelis, Israeli Jews, told the Palestinians our stories of living in the land 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, of exile, of return against all odds, of the Zionist movement bringing us home. It was really, really hard to listen to the stories of the other side because the Palestinian stories contradict the Jewish stories and the Jewish stories contradict the Palestinian stories. Extremely difficult to listen. There were many times in which we felt, I have to get up and argue against them. It's not true, you're making it up. What nonsense. Other times we felt we wanted to run away, not come back. And all the time you feel that you're a traitor for listening to the nonsense that they're saying about themselves and about you. But we kept listening until it hurt, and we listened some more. And I want to make it very clear. We, by and large, did not engage in dialogue. Dialogue is when one side speaks and then the other side listens and responds. We didn't respond. It's about listening and absorbing, processing, and going home and stewing over it, and then coming back next week and you telling your story, and the other side listens and processes it. It's not about response. And I want to tell you some of the insights we came up with through 10 years of non-dialogue. So first of all, almost at the outset, Ali Abu Awad said that what you Jews think about the Palestinians is true. Yes, most Palestinians go to sleep at night dreaming that the Israeli Jews will disappear tomorrow, disappear from this land. Because we Palestinians know that the Jews don't belong. They're foreign occupiers, they're colonialists, and just like The Algerians were able to push the French occupiers out of Algeria, so we Palestinians, if we hold on long enough, we'll push out the Jews because they don't belong. It was really, really hard for us Jews to hear that that's what most Palestinians think. But you know what? We Jews had to admit that we go to sleep at night with the same dream that the Palestinians will disappear tomorrow because we know they don't belong. It's our land and not theirs. They don't belong here, and we hold on long enough, they'll get the message and leave. But what happens when you hear again and again and again from the other side that they think they belong in this land, that they have history in this land, and that they have no other place to go? You know what happens? It fries your brain, because you begin to realize that you've been basing your identity upon an illusion, about a fantasy. Jews think eventually we'll be in the land without the Palestinians. Palestinians think eventually they'll be there without the Jews. It's not going to happen. And you have to reconfigure your understanding of the past, the present, and the future to understand that really we have to live with them and they have to live with us. It's extremely difficult to come to that conclusion, but there is no other conclusion. We also began to see that Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs construct their identities upon the erasure of the other side's identity. Both sides think they can tell the other side who they are. You know what the Jews say about the Palestinians in so many cases? Palestinian, you know there's no such thing. You're making it up. There never was a Palestinian state. You're just Arabs. So go back to Saudi Arabia where you come from. Why did you come to take our land? And you know what the Palestinians say to the Jews? Jew, great. The Quran greatly respects Judaism, but it's a religion. It's a faith. It's not a people, not a nation. You don't need land. So go back to Russia where you came from. But when you listen to the other side's stories of belonging, of history again and again and again, and so many different people from the other side always telling the same stories, you begin to realize you know nothing about who they are. And you have to listen well and let them tell who they are, and they may listen when you tell who you are. We learned, number one, there is such a thing as the Palestinian people. Corollary of number one, there is such a thing as the Jewish people. It's not easy for both sides to accept that. Number two, there is such a thing as the land of Palestine. Corollary of number two, there is such a thing as the land of Israel. And it's really hard for both sides to accept that. Number three, the Palestinians belong to the land of Palestine, and the Jews belong to the land of Israel. It's really hard to accept that. And now the most excruciating thing of all, that the borders of historical Palestine and the borders of historical Israel are the exact same borders. From the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is Palestine, and from the exact same Jordan River to the exact same Mediterranean Sea is historical Israel. That is excruciatingly difficult for a Jew in Israel or a Palestinian to say. But there's no other way and there's no other truth, I believe. The way Ali Abu Awad taught us this is with the following statement. We have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart. Two truths into one heart is the only way to fit two peoples into one land. And I will say that in different language. You don't have to be wrong for me to be right. So many of us in America and certainly in Israel, Palestine, believe that if the other side is right, then I'm wrong. So they better be wrong, and I'll spend all my energy proving that they're wrong. But it's not a zero-sum game. You can be right, and that doesn't make me wrong. You can be right, and I can be right. Two truths. In the work of Roots, thousands of Israelis and thousands of Palestinians have begun and continued on this path of transformation, of going from the hubris of exclusivity to true inclusive pluralism. I'm going to conclude with 3 points. Number one, the work of Roots is exclusively in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. There are at least 140, if not more, small peace organizations within Israel proper, within the Green Line, that do the work of reconciliation there. But we are just about the only organization that focuses in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. We say that that's the heart of the problem, and the people living there, including my community, the settlers, are the heart of the problem, and therefore they must be part of the solution. We cannot sweep them under the rug. They're not going to go away. You can like the settlers, you cannot like them, but you have to, so we believe, you have to talk to them, you have to bring them into the discussion about peace and a better future reconciliation. So Roots has its center, as we talked, the Dignity Center between Bethlehem and Hebron that you see on the map. We also have another local association between Ramallah and Nablus that is north of Jerusalem. We have another group in the Jordan Valley, and we have activists, individual activists all over the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. We're talking to and with the people you have to talk to. That's point number one. Point number two, religion. Religion is part of the problem. Judaism is part of the problem. Islam is part of the problem. We cannot ignore that. It's not going to go away. Religious people, I mean religious Jews, are a central part of the problem, and so are religious Muslims. So therefore, what do? Do we go the normal route of the peace camp the past 40 years and exclude them from the dialogue because they're the enemy? Or do we do what we're doing in Roots, say you're the enemy, you're the problem, and therefore come be part of the solution? We are focusing on religious voices. A major part of our work is interfaith dialogue. And interfaith dialogue does not mean only talking about the texts that are really nice, that are all lovey-dovey, about love your neighbor as yourself that we have in common. No, there are difficult texts that are fueling this conflict on the Jewish side and on the Palestinian side, the Muslim side, and we in Roots bring those difficult texts to the discussion, and we struggle over them, and we're involved in a process of repentance and of reinterpretation. And without that process, I believe, it'll be very hard to see a better future for both sides. And the third point is settlements. Roots is not an organization that comes out in favor of settlements. We indeed recognize the historic Jewish connection to the whole land, including the West Bank, just like we recognize the Palestinian connection to the whole land from the river to the sea. But while we recognize and cherish the Jewish connection to the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, we say that Jews can certainly live there, but not at the expense of the Palestinian people. And the way the settlements, my settlements, I admit it, are being configured and being applied is at the expense of the Palestinian people, and that is wrong. I believe in settlements only after the Palestinians are allowed to build their settlements and to thrive and to use their land, then the Jews can have equal access. But what's happening now is 97% of the land and the resources are being used for my people, and that's not right. There's a word for it. It's called occupation. I don't believe that the land is occupied. I believe that it's Jewish land, just like I believe it's also Palestinian land. But certainly the Palestinian people are under occupation. They're suffering from my occupation, and part of the grassroots work of Roots is to prepare the human groundwork for the end of that occupation. What that means is, this is my last sentence, we in Roots and the people-to-people work understand that we are preparing the human hearts for a future peace settlement of dignity, of freedom, of equality, of human rights, security for both peoples in that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. Hi. Okay, so I will speak louder, and I promise that my presentation will be a bit shorter. I have a shorter story. So maybe an age difference also, an experience difference as well. My name is Noor Awad. I live in Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Actually, not a little bit. I'm going to tell you a lot about myself and the reasons for why I joined Roots and what I think we are trying to accomplish. So, actually, even though I live in Bethlehem in the West Bank, I was born in Jordan. I was born in Amman, Jordan in 1991. And even though I was born in Jordan, I have no connection to Jordan. I only lived there for 4 years. My family are originally from Jerusalem area. from the area of Jerusalem. If you are familiar with the area of Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem, there was a small village called Malha. That was the village of my family, of my grandparents, of my ancestors. My grandparents actually were born in the village. They lived there until 1948. Now, after the acts of violence and the war started in 1948, late of 1947, 1948, there were several villages in our area were attacked from the Jewish side. And also there were Jewish communities who were attacked at that time. But one of those attacks took place in a village called Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin was a neighboring village to my family village. And because of that attack and massacre in Deir Yassin, the people of my village were very afraid that we are going to be next. So the people of my village start to leave their homes and go toward a refugee camp that the United Nations have just set up outside of Bethlehem. Some of my family left. Some of my family stayed in the refugee camp, in the village. But after actually a few weeks, it became hard to stay there. When the Israeli forces arrived, they conquered the village, and no one was able to stay in the village. My grandparents stayed in the refugee camp, and they thought this will be a matter of a short time, maybe a few days, a few weeks, the war will stop, there will be ceasefire or something, and then we will be able to go back to our homes, to our village. My grandparents ended up staying in the refugee camp for a year and a half until the ceasefire happened. And then after the ceasefire, they realized that they will not be allowed to go back because now their village is part of the state of Israel. And where they live in Bethlehem, that became part of the West Bank that Jordan occupied. My parents were born in Bethlehem. They grew up there before 1967 under the Jordanians, the Jordanian occupation. And after 1967, my parents grew up and lived their life under the Israeli occupation. And at some point, my father, he lost hope. He didn't saw back then that there is a future for him to stay there, that he can have a normal life. So that's why my father left to Jordan. My mother also left to Amman. My parents got married there, and that I was born there. In 1995, something different happened in this story, because in 1995, we were in the middle of the Oslo peace process. And finally, after so many decades of fights and wars and all of the experiences that we have, now they are talking about peace. And the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership who are engaged in these talks, they are talking about putting an end to the occupation, and soon there will be a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. That gave a lot of hope to my parents, because then they started to think that this might be the moment for us to go back. We are not going to stay in Jordan forever. This is the time for us to go back to Bethlehem. They didn't say anything about Jerusalem, about my grandparents' house in Malha in west of Jerusalem, but it's fine. That's the time. They're talking about ending the occupation. It's really gave my parents a lot of hope. And based on that hope, my parents decided to move back to Bethlehem. And that's when I moved to live in Palestine. I was very young. I was only 4 years old, 1995. I don't remember so much, but I do have a few memories, actually, a few good memories, you can say. I do remember the times when my father used to work in Jerusalem. And you know, Bethlehem and Jerusalem are sister cities, in a way, if I can call them. Not far really away from each other. We're just 15, 20 minutes, actually, driving. If the traffic is not bad, you will be from the center of Bethlehem, you will be actually in Jerusalem, very close to the old city. So I remember my father going there, driving his car to Jerusalem. That's something that is impossible to do today. There is no way for me to drive from Bethlehem to go to Jerusalem. I remember the times when my family, we used to go to pray on Friday, because I come from a Muslim background. So we come to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and then we go sometimes to the beach, we go to Jaffa, to the city of Jaffa, or up north to Akka. So that's what I remember. I'm not trying to tell you here that those years between 1995 and 2000, the year 2000, was so peaceful that the occupation just, is gone and the conflict ended. No, that didn't happen, actually. But I was too young to understand the complexity of the reality and the situation around me, because, of course, there was violence and there was tension. And as the peace process, the diplomatic process continues, it came to an end in the year 2000 with failure. It failed. It did not lead to an end of occupation and a Palestinian state, and it left us even with more complicated situation on the ground now, because we have the Israeli military still, and we have the settlements, but we have also Palestinian Authority, and the West Bank now is divided to A, B, and C, and so many other things, many other details, but the point is the failure of the peace process created a lot of frustration on the ground. And with the violence that already existed, the second Intifada, the second Palestinian uprising started. Now, the second Intifada, that was the next chapter of my life, a very violent one, 5 years of violence actually. I grew up in Bethlehem, as I mentioned, where all of a sudden the city itself, Bethlehem, like many cities in the West Bank in those years, 2002, 2003, 2004, turned into a war zone, an active war zone. The Israeli army would come in to assassinate Palestinians who are involved in attacks against Israelis. There is the bomb suiciding attacks. There is clashes between Palestinian security forces and Israeli army. There is a siege on the city for over a month, actually. Curfew. At some point, an F-16 was bombing Bethlehem. So that's the reality that I'm growing up with now. And as a young teenager, I was able to understand that I'm living in this war zone, in the middle of this conflict. And I felt so bad about it. I felt so unlucky. I felt because of who I am, meaning being a Palestinian, the fact that I also live there, I have to endure and to go through this. And it's not just something about me, it's like this curse that have been going with my people for generations. It started with my grandparents who became refugees in the war and lost their home and everything they had. And now with my parents actually who became refugees and they were born as refugees and lived from one place to another. And it seemed to me, at the age of 15 years old, that I'm just writing the next chapter in this story of ongoing suffering, of the ongoing catastrophe, like my people call it. And I didn't want that, because I said this is not a normal life. I shouldn't be living my life this way. I don't want to choose this situation. So what do I think about it? I think about the situation and I say there is nothing I can do about it. I'm too little in front of such a big conflict. So maybe the best thing for me to do is to just get out of there. Run away. Go somewhere else. Start a new life, far away from your country, from the bad things that happened there, and move on. Have a better future, better life for yourself. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to leave, and I wanted to go to a new country and start a new life. But that was not the only idea in my head. Because whenever I actually think about the situation, I go and I find myself asking, but what really can I do? Because I'm not really satisfied easily with the answer that there is nothing you can do. And I ask myself again, what can we do? And when I say we, I'm not only talking about my people, my side. I'm also talking specifically about my generation. Because this generation that opened their eyes, we opened our eyes, we found this situation, we didn't choose it, but we have to do something about it. Yes, we can sit and blame others. I can blame the Israelis for what they did to us in the past and what they are doing to us now. I can blame my side. I can blame the older generation. I can blame my grandparents or blame the leadership or blame my parents. But at the end of the day, this is the situation that we have to deal with, and we have to do something about it. I am putting you basically in the mindset, the psychology of a Palestinian living in the West Bank, growing up under these circumstances. Now, if you live there as a Palestinian, it doesn't take you a long time to understand that the number one reason that makes our life complicated and that takes away our national rights and our freedoms and sometimes our basic human rights as human beings is the fact that we live under occupation, under the control of another nation. And I'm not saying that the conflict is only just about the occupation that started in 1967, but for my generation, that's what we are mostly living. We don't even refer to it usually as a conflict. When I talk to my friends, to my neighbors, to the people I know, we don't use the word conflict because it's not a fight between two countries and two armies and two equal sides. No, we are controlling by them, and we are controlled by them, and we are controlled by their occupation, and that's how we see it. So what to do? We have to fight to end this occupation. And this is not something unique. There are many other nations around the world who lived and still live under occupation, and they fight for their freedom. They struggle until they get their freedom from their enemy. They liberate themselves and liberate their lands. So that's how I start to see it. But that actually means, when I say that I want to fight and I want to resist, that actually means that I'm going there and doing something. Whether it's violence or not violence, I'm going there and being active and doing something. And if I'm resisting the occupation violently, it could be that I could put myself in a very dangerous and risky situation and I could be killed. But you know what? All of that is happening and I'm 15 years old. I'm telling myself, you know, if this is the price for the freedom and dignity of my people and the future generations, then I'll have to do it. That's how I think about it. And so I'm struggling between those two ideas. Is there something I can do, or nothing I can do? I just run away or stay there and fight for my freedom. This is not just a theoretical debate I'm having with myself when I'm 15 years old. This is the reality around me. And some of my friends actually were arrested. Some of my friends, I had a friend who was killed in the Second Intifada. I've known a lot of people who went through many things. But that's the reality that I live. That's the reality I grew up with. Now, I want to tell you another story. In 2016, I was hired to guide a group of American students. So back home, I work as a tour guide, mostly in the West Bank. That's where I can work as a tour guide. I am a Palestinian licensed tour guide, which means that my license comes from the Palestinian Authority, and because of the restrictions and the movement restrictions, I only work in the West Bank area. So anyone usually comes to the West Bank and looking for a Palestinian tour guide, he or she would reach out to me. And since that, I mentioned that I live in Bethlehem, right? There is a lot of tourists come to Bethlehem. I don't know if you know that, but Bethlehem is like the second, I can say that, the second most holiest place after Jerusalem in Christianity. So a lot of Christian pilgrims. That give me the chance to meet internationals all the time. Many of those internationals have to a certain level, a certain extent, hear the Israeli side of the story. They might hear the Israeli perspective. The reason why, when they arrive to Israel and they land at the Ben Gurion airport, if they go to Jerusalem, they are most likely, they will meet Israelis, they will have their Israeli guide, they're being told the story from the Israeli perspective. But when they are in Bethlehem, this is their chance, it could be their first time, or the first chance to hear about the situation from a Palestinian perspective. So I start to work more with the groups, and at some point I started to guide groups that interested in the geopolitical situation, in what's happening actually in the West Bank. And in 2016, I have this group of students who were actually coming from political science, a political science background, and they are making their program for 2 weeks in Israel and Palestine. And their program was divided mostly like this. On the first week, they have their Israeli guide, and they visit the Israeli side. They have meetings with people, members of the civil society. They also meet with Knesset members. They meet with maybe officials in the government, and they make sure to hear the Israeli side. And on the second week, they come to the Palestinian side, and they did basically the same thing. So I was with this group for 1 day, and that's the same day that I came to Roots. But I want to tell you how I actually came to Roots. I wasn't aware that day that I'm actually going to Roots. I took the group, and I was asked to take them to the city of Hebron. That's south of the West Bank, about an hour away from Bethlehem, driving away. So I start the tour in the morning with the group. We leave Bethlehem, we leave Area A. Now we are driving in Area C of the West Bank, and that's where you see the settlements and the checkpoints on the way to Hebron. And of course, as a guide, I'm talking about it, and I'm explaining to the group what they are seeing around themselves, what they are seeing around us, those settlements that are being built, the military checkpoint, how the settlements are affecting us, two-state solution, new facts on the ground, what's happening with the two-state solution, what's happening on the ground. So the group learns more and more. And then we get to Hebron. And then I take the group in the old city of Hebron and on the Palestinian side. And I also explain to them about the situation there. And at some point, we got to have lunch. And we were hosted by a family, a Palestinian family there. They hosted us for lunch. And the family also shared about their experience, about soldiers coming in at night, searching their home, turning everything upside down, about settlers' attacks. So now we are at the end of the day, after we had lunch, and you can say that the group have heard and seen what does it mean for Palestinians to live under occupation. They know now some of the experiences, some of the reality. Before we leave Hebron and go back to Bethlehem, we still have one more meeting that day. And that meeting was with an Israeli settler who lives in Hebron. Now, for logistical reasons, because I mentioned that the group is like listening from both sides and try to listen to different perspectives, so they have arranged this meeting with the settler. It wasn't through me, but my job is to bring them to the meeting. Now, how would I do that? Because I will not be able to enter the settlement, but I have the guy phone number, so I called, we talked, and I told him that probably I should bring the group to you. I will hand the group over because they have to go inside the settlement with you, and I will find place to wait at one of the Palestinian shops there in the old city. But actually, he suggested no, that I should come with them and join. How would we do that? Me and him and the group are now starting to look for a place where we all can sit together in the old city of Hebron, and there is no such place. There is no place like that. Eventually, he suggested that we go to the tomb of the patriarchs, to the Ibrahimi Mosque. It's a very important place. It's a holy place in the old city of Hebron. But that place is also under the Israeli military authority right now. And it's divided to two places, to two sections. One is the Muslim section, and the second is the Jewish one. So Palestinians are only allowed to go to the Muslim section, and the Jews, the Israelis, are only allowed to go to the Jewish section. And there is a checkpoint in the middle at some point. I cannot cross to the Jewish section. And of course, he wanted us to go and sit on the Jewish section. So I said, what to do? He said, listen, I will walk in front of you, in front of the group. The soldiers know me because I live in the area. You actually walk among the group. I had some 40 people with me. The soldiers will not see you. And that's how we did it. That's how I smuggled myself on the other side of the checkpoint. And it was my first time and the only time on that side of the tomb of the patriarchs. We sat, and then he actually started to talk to us. He did very much actually what me and Rabbi Hanan are doing tonight, telling us his personal story, about his story, who he is. He began by introducing himself. Of course, he said his name, and then he said that he actually was born here in the US. And he grew up and lived his life as an American Jewish citizen. And he made sure to say to us that his life was actually very good here. That he did not decide to leave the States because of that he as a Jewish person was suffering from anti-Semitism personally, or that he could not live here as an American anymore, but that for him to live on the land, on the land of his ancestors, on the land of Israel, the land of Palestine, was a fulfillment of his Jewish identity. Now, I'm the only Palestinian in the audience, so I immediately understood, of course, he's talking from the concept of Zionism. He's explaining to us Zionism, and that's how he's seeing the situation. But the way, in my mind, I'm relating to him, I'm still relating to him as an American. I'm not thinking necessarily what's the religion. Okay, as an American Jewish person, and he's talking, and he's really convinced that, he left his country thousands of miles away, and he came here to settle my land, and he thinks this is his land. But I continue actually to listen to him. And then he said two things. He based his story on those two things. He said, one, there is no occupation. It can't be. Because we are the Jewish people returning to our land, and there is no way that this return of the Jewish people to the land can be considered illegal. And I was like, what? In my mind, of course, I did not interrupt him, or I didn't say anything, but in my mind I could say, how could you say that? What do you mean there's no occupation? I mean, I thought we agree on this one. I mean, it's not about your personal perspective or my personal perspective, it's a legal fact. The legal fact is that we live under Israeli army law and Israeli army control. Palestinian Authority is not independent state. The Israeli army controls our border. The state of Israel is the sovereign power there. So what do you say there's no occupation? Of course there is. I really could not understand, even though he said it. I couldn't mentally understand how he can say there is no occupation. How could he deny it? And then the second thing he said, that was less shocking actually. He said there is no Palestinian people. They are just Arabs. There is no such thing as Palestinian people. There is no such thing as Palestinian nation. And now the group is getting confused. Because if there is no Palestinians, and if there is no occupation, then why there is a conflict? Of course, they are asking him. And he answered, and he gives his answers, but the more I listen to him, the more I feel that this guy is denying us completely, meaning denying my side, denying the circumstances that I live under, denying the situation, denying my identity, to the level that I felt, if I listen to him more, I don't exist. And I left that meeting that day really sad and angry and frustrated. I felt very denied on every level. Of course, I said something at the end to him, and we ended up arguing about it. That doesn't matter. The thing is that I left there, and I felt that by listening to this guy, I was so denied. I'm being denied. And you know what? On the bus, I realized that this Israeli settler that I met in Hebron was the first Israeli that I met in my life. Someone can say, how? You live there. How that this person was the only Israeli that you met? Because I realized then that all Israelis that I met so far were Israeli soldiers. The Israeli soldiers, when they stop us at the checkpoints, when they come to Bethlehem to arrest someone, we don't have conversations with them. I don't know what they think, what is there in their mind. They are soldiers controlling our life. We don't have a civilized conversation or talk with soldiers. And I understood that he's a settler, of course, and he's giving a very extreme perspective from the Israeli side. But I was so frustrated from that meeting. I was so angry to the level that I said, I met my first Israeli and the last one. I don't want to meet any one of them again. But I didn't know that on the same day, I'm going actually to Roots. I understood that I need to bring the group there, and there is a meeting with another person, another Israeli speaker, who actually is a settler as well. So on the way to Roots, I pick up my phone and I called one of the people who I work with because it became actually confusing. I misunderstood. I thought this is a meeting with a settler, but it turns out there is something more than that. And I called Saeed and I asked Saeed, what's happening? Where are we going? What's this project Roots? And then Saeed tell me that, Noor, this is a project between Palestinians and Israelis, and between Israeli settlers as well. And I was like, what they are doing there, the Palestinians? And he said they are talking about peace. That sounded like the most suspicious and the most dangerous and the most ridiculous thing that I can hear. I got so angry. I was like, Saeed, what do you mean? And I wanted to go there, not to see the Israelis, not to meet the Israelis in the initiative. I wanted to go and meet the Palestinians and ask, like, what are you doing sitting with settlers? So actually, we arrived there at the center, at the place that Rabbi Hanan actually described, Palestinian farmland in Area C. We were received by Rabbi Hanan. Ali, the co-founder of Roots, actually, who was supposed to be there, was not there, and it was only Rabbi Hanan. And then we met with Rabbi Hanan. We sat there. He welcomed us. He started to tell us about the place, about what's happening, and then he started to tell us his story. And at the beginning, when I was listening to Rabbi Hanan, it was really getting very, very difficult for me to listen. He's talking about the same things. He was also, he was born in the US. He was 18. He picked up his bags. He decided to leave because that's his land. That's how he thinks. Again, in my mind, I'm taking you back 8 years ago. That's how in my mind I see it. I'm hearing from this American Jewish person who really think that he have the right to come there and take my land. That's how in my mind I'm listening to him. And then the more he talks about it, the more how he describes his connection to the land, I get more frustrated. And I say, he's not going to say anything about the occupation or about what's happening. And you know what? At some point I said to myself, I should just get up and leave. Just leave the room. We are a group and we have a bus with us, right? And there's a bus driver. He's outside alone. So I said I should go and just join him and take a break. But I didn't do that. For a number of reasons. One of it is actually I felt it's unprofessional for me to leave the group in the middle of the meeting and to just go out. We can say also it's like impolite, but also the most important reason is that I said to myself, maybe he will say something about the truth. Just listen. And then Rabbi Hanan started to tell us these stories one after another, realizing that his story and his connection to the land is not the only one. There is another people there. And the land have another name, and there is another story that's equally important, and the people there are living under different circumstances than he lived. He is a citizen, and we are under occupation. And then he talked about these stories of meeting with Jamal and his family, and meeting with Ali, and how that affected him. And by the end of his talk, my group was very confused. They didn't expect to hear that from a settler. That's not how he's supposed to talk. And we left. And I know they were confused because they asked me some questions about it and they talked about it, we talked. But you know what? I remember that day very well, leaving Roots and leaving the meeting with Rabbi Hanan. And he's technically the second Israeli that I met in my life. And I didn't feel confused. I felt two things very strongly. One is I felt recognition. I'm being recognized that when I was listening to Rabbi Hanan through his story, that my story, my identity, my side of the story is also being recognized. It's being seen, it's being acknowledged. And the second thing, I felt this level of empathy, that he was also able to take another step and to empathize, not just to rationally understand the Palestinian story, but he was able to show empathy toward that story, even though it's supposed to contradict his own story, and that other identity contradicts his identity. That was very, very interesting, very challenging, and very inspiring. You know what? I could say to myself that day, okay, Rabbi Hanan was a nice person, but Noor, remember, not most Israelis think like that. Maybe he's like a phenomenon, he's a very nice person, but for sure most Israelis are like the first settler that you met. But I didn't say that to myself because I thought that the moment I met with Rabbi Hanan, I found someone on the other side who's a human being and who can be a partner. And that made me very, very excited. So actually, we decided to meet again. I met with Rabbi Hanan. He took me to Roots. I met with Ali. I met with Jamal. I met with Khalid. I met with Shaul, with Hadassah, with the other activists. And I made sure, actually, at the beginning, to listen very well to what the people are doing there. Because I came already with my prejudgments and my view for those organizations. You know what? It wasn't like that I didn't know about Israeli-Palestinian joint spaces and organizations before. Of course, I heard of them. But as a Palestinian growing up during the Second Intifada and the failure of the Oslo peace process, I thought, these people, what they are doing, don't they see, how they think that just talking to each other is going to stop this conflict or end the occupation? It will not. People are doing it because they are either naive or maybe they have another interests. Maybe they are doing it for some other reasons, but for sure they are not effective and they are not maybe sincere. That's how I was thinking about it. But I had to stop thinking this way and give myself the chance to understand. And the more and more I listened to the experiences of Palestinian and Israeli activists, of people who lost their loved ones, of people who suffered through this conflict, I started to learn from them. Today, I consider Rabbi Hanan one of the teachers in my life and one of the most important people and inspiring people that I met. And to tell you why I joined Roots, it has to do with the part in my story in what I talked about responsibility, about changing the present and building a better future. Because that struggle is not just only a Palestinian struggle, by the way, on the land. That should be the struggle of both people. Both people who are living on the land should struggle and make sure that the future generations are not living in conflict and killing each other, but living on the land and sharing it together in respect, in recognition, and both people live there in dignity. So the way to say what I just said in other words, I see the work of Roots, what we are doing, and the work of other similar organizations as an effort of co-resisting the occupation, but not just only the occupation. Also, it's a work of reconciliation, to reconcile two nations that both belong to the same homeland. That's our work. There is a lot still to say about, but I have to stop at some point. I promised it's a short one, it's a short presentation, and I want to make sure there is enough time for the questions. Thank you for listening.
مرحبا اسمي خالد أبو عواد من قرية بيت أمر فلسطين.
שלום, אני הדסה פרומן מתקוע, אשתו של הרב מנחם פרומן, זיכרונו לברכה.
My name is Nadine, I am from Bethlehem.
Shalom, my name is Shaul, I live in Tekoa.
Hi, I'm Bilal, I'm from Beit Umar.
My name is Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, and I live in Alon Shvut.
4 years ago, here in our family land, Roots start. Roots is a partnership between people from both sides, people who believe in non-violence, dignity and quality between our people. Dignity for me is when you respect the other one, when you give him the space for his life, when you respect his opinion, his culture. This is the dignity, and it's very important for us, the Middle East people. We try here to give another picture to the people in order to increase the hope inside them.
We work in many many different directions, but one of the core things that happens here is the people-to-people work.
Nobody could imagine a space where Israeli and Palestinian youth from the West Bank could meet each other and work together and be building a better future. This cannot happen without friendship, without love for each other, and to have fun together.
In all my life, before I come to youth group, I only went once to Israel or to beach. It was very emotional to go with each other because I never imagined that I would go to beach with an Israelis, you know.
All of these programs engage with our local communities, bringing people who were a little bit afraid to come and came for the first time and then saw something that surprised them and became involved.
אנחנו פה עומדים כולנו בכאב גדול. והשאלה איך גורמים לזה שזה לא יהיה עוד פעם ולא נעמוד פה באותו בכי.
It was so important when Rose went to Lesion Junction, you know, to protest against the violence in Douma. And both Palestinians and Israelis should condemn violence and should stand with each other against violence and should show the people, the world, and also the extremists on both sides that there are Palestinians who are against violence and they are protesting and they are saying no violence in my name. And also Israelis who are saying the same thing.
We expand our circles in many ways. I travel and speak all over Israel, in the radio, in the television, and a lot of meeting with young people. People are thirsty to hear what we are doing. They don't believe the dream of peace can become real.
Roots Network today includes representatives from 28 different Israeli and Palestinian towns in this area, this local area.
has created a miracle, an expanding island of sanity, a veritable Garden of Eden, in a land full with so much ignorance of the other, prejudice, stereotypes, and fear. We are beginning to bring a little bit of healing, deep recognition of the others belonging to this land, preparing the grounds for a future of coexistence, human rights, dignity, and mutual recognition. We need your help. We ask you to join us and join the thousands of people around the globe who are supporting Roots. Instead of exporting the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to the four corners of the globe, help us to export recognition and respect. Thank you very much.
We want everyone to know that that film was made 5 years ago. The reach of Roots is today double from what you heard there. Before we begin questions and answers, we have a slide. that gives you the opportunity to sign up for the monthly newsletter of Roots by email. We promise we don't send anything out more than once a month. We won't fill up your inbox, so you can take a picture of the QR code, or there's also sheets that are going to be sent around to sign up manually if you want with your name and email. So the sheets will go around, and then I guess I'm passing on the microphone to begin the...
Join me in thanking them again. You all can keep the mic. Imam Wahid, thank you for being with us tonight. Please write your questions down, and if you've got your questions, you can hold them up and pass them down, and our ushers will pick them up. And while that is taking place, and while they're coalescing any questions that you all have surfaced, I'll just kick us off by asking, can you share a bit about the nature of your work since October 7 and how it has deepened? What's that looked like within Roots and outside?
So I just want to say, as Noor, and from the Palestinian maybe perspective inside, the past year in general was a very difficult year in the conflict. Even before the 7th of October, especially in the West Bank where we are, the level of tensions was rising. Israel in January 2023, the new government that was elected was the most right-wing government. Probably you hear that. And the conflict was already going to a worse level. Now, since the 7th of October, it became impossible for us to continue to do the work as we used to do, simply because of logistics. People cannot leave their areas. Whether if you are living in a settlement or if you are living in a Palestinian town or a village, you are not allowed to leave. The Israeli army blocked the road in the first couple of days of the war, and the Palestinian cities remained blocked and almost under siege until this day. Actually, I was able to go to the center where we work because it's outside of the city of Bethlehem. It's in Area C, close to the Gush Etzion area, only just a week before I came to the US. So 2 weeks ago, that was my first time in 4 months to actually be able to go to the center. Of course, both Israelis and Palestinians are traumatized and afraid and angry and from what happened and what's still happening in Gaza and from the attack since the 7th of October. So it's almost impossible to do the work. But we didn't stop, of course. Our focus in the last 3 months was on this. We actually worked to send humanitarian aid to Palestinian families in the West Bank and also to Israeli families who had to evacuate from their homes. And some of them live in our areas. And so what we have been engaged, really working on in the last 3 months was distributing aid, food packages, and sometimes paying for medication or for medical treatment for some people and education fees on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. We have done some of the Zoom meetings. One of the ways that we find actually the best way to do it is not to bring the two sides into for dialogue. That will not be helpful right now. But we actually brought the activists and the leaders of the movement to speak to the other side. So we have like a Palestinian speaking to an audience of 30 Israeli or 40 Israeli members via Zoom, and the opposite. An Israeli talking to 30 or 40 Palestinians also via Zoom about the situation and about how can we deal with the situation and how can we move forward. A lot of the work, there was a lot of effort actually to just keep the organization together. And I will give the credit to Rabbi Hanan because he actually was one of the few voices and leaders at Roots that all the time did a lot of effort to try to just keep the organization together, because what happened since the 7th of October wasn't an easy thing, not just for us, but for also many other organizations on the ground. We are still figuring out what's going to be next, but there are some discussions at Roots that we should focus on the education, and also we should focus more on the political activism or on the political level. I myself spent the last 3 months with a group, another group actually, a joint Israeli-Palestinian. It's called A Land for All, and they actually have a proposal for a resolution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they make sure that they work on the political level. There are some organizations that do the groundwork and the grassroots, but they actually continue the work by working on the political level. And in the last 3 months, they had some successful meetings as well. I had some successful meetings with them, and their main point in this time is to bring actually Israeli and Palestinian voices into the discourse of the day after. The Israeli government, most of you know, doesn't really have a strategy, a clear strategy after the war in Gaza. And I would say, this is my opinion, this is my personal opinion, the current Israeli leadership is not really interested in resolving the conflict or having a solution to the conflict. So those activists I'm referring to, this group, A Land for All, beside Roots and other groups, are actually trying to bring to the discourse among diplomats and also international community and other governments, how can we actually build a strategy for us for the day after the war and for us to resolve this issue. So that's did I forget anything? That's mostly what's happening in the last 3-4 months. But it's a very, very difficult time.
Can we pass the clipboards around? Can someone get up and just pass them around? The clipboards for names and emails, those who want to join the mailing list.
Rabbi, did you want to also respond? Or, ready? Okay. One question was lots of discussion of pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist language, having difficulty trusting people from, quote, the other side. What words of hope or direction do you have for us as we try to trust and understand?
I hope, the question was, what words of hope or encouragement do we have for those who are struggling to listen to the other side? I hope that our presentation of the past hour and a half provides an opening and a means of listening to the other side. Perhaps I'll say one word. I often find that there are Palestinians who come to our work, come to our center in order to tell off the Israelis. Sometimes it happens that Palestinians look for me at the center and they want to tell me off, tell me how bad the Israelis are, how bad the settlers are. I believe my job is to listen to them. It's not to deny them, it's not to respond and tell them why they're wrong, it's to listen. Why do I believe that? Number one, perhaps I have something to learn. Number two, when you listen to someone who has a full stomach of invective, sometimes listening to them will be helpful to them, because after they've gotten it off their chest, they'll be able to listen themselves to someone from the other side afterwards. So I often say, there are Jews who come to me in the US, especially in college campuses, and they say, we're trying to do dialogue with the Palestinians. They don't want to listen. They only want to scream and criticize and come out against us Jews. And I say, see if you can take it. Let them scream at you. 1 session, 2 sessions, the chances are the 3rd session, they'll have said it all, and they'll be willing to listen to you. So I suggest, if you're able, if I'm understanding the question properly, be willing to listen even though you're the brunt of deep criticism, no matter which side you're on. The dialogue can begin after you're willing to listen to the pain of the other side.
How do you envision the Roots movement scaling up to? Is the hope for a liberal democracy not rooted in ethnicity, but in membership and shared governance ideals? What do you...
Can you say again the last part of the question?
How do you envision the Roots movement scaling up? What did it scale up to? Is there hope for a liberal democracy not rooted in ethnicity, but in membership and shared governance ideals?
Say something? Okay. First of all, Roots and the other 140, 160 organizations that do people-to-people grassroots work, we all have to scale up 1,000-fold in order to make a real difference. One of the major things we need is money, and that money comes not only from you, it also comes from you, but not only. We need money from governments. The US government, about 3 years ago, passed a $250 million bill, giving out $50,000 over the course of 5 years. All the altogether $250 million to people peace work. That's really important. It's still just a drop in the bucket compared to the money given for war. It's nothing. We have to make sure that that appropriation continues every year. Congress has to reapprove the appropriation of the $50 million every year. So congressmen and congresswomen need to hear that you're in favor of that appropriation. It's called the MEPA bill, M-E-P-P-A. And we're trying to advocate together with other peace organizations that other governments like the European Union and like Britain and France will also add to this fund for Middle East peace. That's one of the important things for scaling up. And then the question was, what do we envision? Our vision is for a new social and political reality that recognizes both sides' historical connection to the whole land from the river to the sea and grants both sides dignity, equality, freedom, security, and human rights. What is that going to look like? Is it going to be a one-state? Is it going to be a two-state solution? We don't take a position. Noor and I are members of a movement called the Land for All that has a vision of two states connected in a confederation. I won't say more about that, but I will respond to the details of the question. The question seemed to assume that a liberal democracy that's not based on ethnicity is the solution for the land between the river and the sea. I want to suggest that might not be the answer. At least in the Middle East, if not actually around the world, identity is really important to people. America is a melting pot, but in many, if not most other places in the world, people are not just human beings. They are deeply connected to their particularist identity. And Roots as an organization works with the assumption that Jews are going to stay Jews, and that has to have an expression in the political arena, and Palestinians are going to remain Palestinians, and that has to have an expression in the political arena. So our vision is not about overcoming religion or ethnicity or collective identity. It's about taking the sting of exclusivism and out of that and being able to build a shared society that's based on reconciliation, that my identity is true and real and recognized, but yours is as well.
I just want to mention one small thing. So one of the ways that we were trying to grow Roots actually in the last few years is by creating more community centers like the one we have created and we are talking about. And in other areas in the West Bank, such as the Jordan Valley, the north of the West Bank, we succeeded to have groups and chapters of Roots, but we didn't have yet succeed to actually have a physical center, for example, in the Jordan Valley area or in the north of the West Bank for people to meet. And so many times I actually have, through my Israeli partners and Palestinian partners, I find about so many people who actually want to meet, but it's far distance for them. It's far distance to come to the center in the south where we live, south of Jerusalem, south of Bethlehem. So that was, for example, one of the difficulties and one of the things that we are dealing with. But we are still trying to grow. And also another way for us to scale up the work is by joining and working with other organizations. We are not the only one in the land. Of course, we work in the West Bank, and that has like its Roots has its thing by working and focusing on the West Bank. But all the time, I make sure that we have connection with other organizations that have similar work to our work in the land.
Have you made statements in Israel as an organization in relation to the war, the broader?
No, we haven't made a statement. There was a statement that was made. There were actually several statements. One of the things that I didn't actually mention yet about the effect of the 7th of October was that at Roots, we felt it, and in other organizations, many of the Palestinians and the Israelis actually, the moment that the war began, felt that they are under attack, under a threat, and therefore the violence that we are doing is a form of self-defense against the aggression that the other side is doing. And so that was one of the things that I said that Rabbi Hanan actually had a lot of effort to keep the movement together, to keep the organization, because many people started to support the violence on this side or the other side, or justify the violence that comes from their side. There was a statement, there was several statements, but not Roots statements, that came from other member organizations in the Land for All, in the ALMEB, in the Alliance for Middle East Peace. One of them is I will refer to because I personally support like these statements. One of them was the Women Wage Peace statement. That was a very actually good statement that came out on the 5th day or the 6th day of the war. To basically, if I want to summarize it, is to release the hostages, the Israeli hostages in Gaza unconditionally, to cease fire, and to bring the politicians on the table to make a solution to the conflict. Those are the things that peace activists and members of the civil society start to demand. In other places, in other groups, it took more time and more conversation for the Israeli and Palestinian partners to agree on a statement. But I will say one more thing, which is important. What happened on the 7th of October was, of course, effective, was a big thing. But through the years of our work, we learned that statements actually many times doesn't do us good in our work back home. There are crucial moments where we said we have to speak up, we have to put a statement out there, but not actually every time the statement was serving the work we are doing. I'll stop here.
I want to continue what Noor just said. I hope it's clear that Roots is an organization that is swimming against the current. The constituencies that we are appealing to, the local Palestinians and the local Israelis in the West Bank, by and large don't believe in what we in Roots believe in. We are trying to get them on the peace wagon almost against their will. Under those circumstances, any type of statement will not serve us well. It will just alienate the very constituencies that we're trying to gradually and very slowly bring into the peace camp. The less we say, the better. At the same time, the more we do, the better.
Thank you. We've been showing what you can do slides, and some space. We hope that you all will linger and have conversation amongst yourselves, and certainly with our presenters in our entry area, and hope that you will linger, and thank you for the gift of time that you've shared tonight. Please join me again in offering a final thank you to these wonderful folks.
Do we have the final slide there? Thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate your response. It's heartwarming. We want to end by telling you, in our humble opinion, what we think you can do to make a difference. So we have here about 5 or 6 slides. I'm not going to read them to you because I can't see them. But perhaps what we can do is keep each slide on the screen for 20 seconds.
Yeah, zip it up, yeah.
And anyone who wants to take a picture of them can take a picture of them. So look at them.
Yep, they're rotating through, and also,
okay.
Yep, exactly. And you also have we have offering plates on the very back, if you in the back and at the exits. If you wish to make a contribution to Roots, you can drop a check in there. You can scan to get on their newsletter, which links to their website. I understand that many of the Palestinian peacemakers in particular have had work visas revoked, so supporting subsistence and also deepening the work that you all are doing. And we thank you for the privilege of being part of it. Anything
So
further?
let's close with this. If you came here tonight as a strong supporter of Israel, we hope you will leave as a strong supporter of Israel. And if you came here tonight as a strong supporter of Palestine, we hope you will leave as a strong supporter of Palestine. But the thing is, we request, don't leave as a strong supporter of one side at the expense of the other side. Because if the Palestinians don't get what they need, want, and deserve, Israel will not get what it needs, wants, and deserves. And if Israel does not get what it needs, wants, and deserves, the Palestinians will not get what they need, want, and deserve. And therefore, the message is pro-Palestine, pro-Israel. That's the only way to be pro a better future for both sides. Good evening.
Go in peace.